And just like that, we're back. We are back. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Common Sense. I feel like I haven't addressed the elephant in the room. I feel like, see when your girlfriend or wife or whatever comes home with a new haircut and they're like, yo, are you going to notice? And you're like, yo, what's the weather outside? We have a new intro music. I just haven't acknowledged it, but we have a new intro music. I hope you like it. It's more jazzy, fun, down to earth, all those buzzwords that producers love. But the truth is, I think it shows personality, which we're all about here on this amazing podcast. Let's Talk Common Sense is a podcast where we get, stuck in to some key topics, debating them, giving you a chance to hear different perspectives. And today, what I decided we would do is talk about Brexit. Now, hold on. I know what you're thinking. I don't want to hear about Brexit. Neither do I, okay? Because Brexit has become that word that when people hear it, they just switch off. So what I'm doing today is something akin to like a Dummies guide to Brexit. Now, I'm not insulting you. You are not a dummy. You are a confident I'm not going to go down. It's going to start motivating you there. Let's not do that. This is not for dummies per se, but what we want to do is kind of find out what's been happening. What's been going on. So I thought I would bring someone on who is always online, trending, always on BBC shows, and I think he's on another show called it's a show where they debate. I forgot the show. I think there's about 4 people who come around to debate or something. What's it called? I think it might be called The Debate. I don't know. Anyways, he needs no introduction, really. I'm bringing Femi on board. This is Femi Sorry. You may know him from Twitter. He has over 200,000 followers, and he's always, he's been blocked by so many politicians, but he's always getting stuck in trying to explain what's happening with Brexit. He's a lawyer or law grad, and he's a Remainer. Let's just call a spade a spade. He's an ardent Remainer. He believes in Remain, and even though we're fastly approaching the 31st of December deadline that we've set for the EU and the UK to agree on a deal. No, he's got all sorts of thoughts about what we should be doing next. So today I'm going to channel my inner Nigel Farage, right? And put questions to him about, is Brexit good for the UK? What's been happening? What might change from the 1st of January? What's going on, basically. So it's an easy listen. It's fun. It's engaging. And I think you're going to enjoy it. So without further ado, let me invite on Femi. Right, so I must say, again, I've told you off air, but I'm going to tell you one more time. Femi, you're a legend for doing this at such short notice. We were having a conversation a few minutes ago, and here you are now. I said before, I want this to be a kind of Dummies guide to Brexit, because if we're being honest, it's one of those topics that we know we should know about, but it was interesting to engage in the debate when it was about sovereignty versus, do we get to rule our borders, so on and so forth. But now that we're getting really technical, I think people have kind of checked out.
Yeah.
Now, Femi, you call yourself a do-gooder. What does that mean?
Basically, a couple of months ago, our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, when she was talking about how she wanted to send asylum seekers to an offshore camp, she said that she was being blocked by lefty lawyers and do-gooders. And as somebody who studied law and generally opposes her, I figured, all right, if she wants to call me a do-gooder and act like that's a bad thing, I'll take on the mantra.
Yeah, it is kind of odd that you use that as a pejorative, you do-gooder.
Yeah, it's basically saying, hey, I'm the bad guy. She's gone full on Billie Eilish.
Well, if people don't know who you are, they've most probably seen you online because you've got so many different. Not only do you write, for the at the Independent, the iPaper, so on and so forth, but you've got these videos. I don't know how you do them. They're always trending. They're always doing one online where you're breaking things down. I've seen you on Jeremy Vine. I mean, I've just seen you all over the TV, all across different channels, just fighting the fight for Remain. Am I correct?
Yeah, pretty much. It's not Remain anymore because officially we have left the EU. So right now it's about trying to, if we can, soften the Brexit so it's not as massive a destruction of our economy as Boris Johnson wants it to be. B, make sure that people are aware that the damage we're about to see is because of Brexit and can't be blamed on the EU or Remainers or COVID, and C, try and pave the way to getting us back into the EU in a couple of years' time.
Yeah. And it's important for people to know as well, because so you've put your cards on the table. I should probably put mine too, because the whole point of this podcast is to expose people to different ideas and to get them to kind of make up their own mind. So even though I am for the most part a Remainer, I'm going to channel my inner Nigel Farage and
do so
and try to at least put an opposite perspective out there so people can make up their own mind as to what's going on. Now, you said already that the UK actually left the European Union technically on the 31st of January 2020, but people will note that not really much has changed, and that's because for about 11 months, the idea was to allow leaders to be able to negotiate what life would look like after Brexit. So talks are currently underway, and the 31st of December is the deadline that's been set for things to be settled. Now, for folks who are kind of thinking, okay, but what is the Brexit deal? The idea is for the UK and the European Union, which will now be two sovereign entities. Some may argue they've always been so, but the idea is that they have to agree new rules on how they want to live, how they want to work, and how we want to trade together. So some of the big contentious points have been stuff around tariffs, around trade deals, around fishing, which we're going to go into in a minute. But what I thought would be good to do, Femi, with you is, when you kind of watch, if you're watching a series and one series is over and a new series starts, there's kind of a little kind of 1 minute period where they just kind of do a recap.
Yeah.
They show you who was cheating on who. They show you what happened. I wondered if you could do that for us. What have we missed? If the last time people paid attention, which I suspect may be the case, was when you had that debate with Nigel Farage long time ago. What have people missed? What's been happening?
Okay, so if we're going back to 2017, you had Theresa May offering people a different Brexit deal, which most Brexit voters didn't like. And that's a large part of the argument that I've made, that Brexit could have been 1,000 different things. That essentially, when you go down to the nuts and bolts of what is Brexit, as it stood before, they were members of the EU. What does being members of the European Union actually mean logically? It means that we're signed up to the treaties of the EU, the international agreements of the EU. Now, under that, it means that when you want to buy and sell stuff between the UK and France or Germany or whatever, there are no charges, no tariffs. We have the same laws because we make laws together in Brussels. And therefore, anything made in the UK legally can be sold automatically in any European country because we have the same laws. You don't need to check stuff at the border. There's no red tape. There's no extra charges, anything like that. And given that half of the stuff we sell, half of our trade goes to the EU, given that we get a third of all the food in supermarket shelves from the EU, it makes life cheaper for us if we share those laws, if we have no tariffs, no charges, no nothing. Now, the deal that Theresa May signed, the deal that Boris Johnson's going for is he wants us to have a deal where basically we have no tariffs, but we also have different rules to the EU. Now, if we have different rules to the EU, then that does create friction at the border. It makes it more expensive when you're trading across borders. And this deal that he's looking for, the EU is basically saying no, because sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but in 2019 in the election, you had Boris Johnson coming on TV saying, "I'm going to get Brexit done. I'm going to get Brexit done. I've got an oven-ready deal." Now, that deal basically says for the next year, we'll stay as we are, same laws, same shared stuff, no differences in trade. That's why things haven't really changed that much this year. But after that, hopefully in this year period, we'd have negotiated a new trade deal. Now, first of all, that included some stuff about Northern Ireland, which he's now said he's going to break, which is pissing off the EU. Sorry, can I say that?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay. And so he's come on TV and said he's breaking international law, which is fun. He's also said that basically, imagine if you're from the EU's perspective and you don't want a situation where UK businesses can sell freely to EU customers, but don't have to follow any of the rules that EU businesses have to follow. Because if that were the case, UK businesses would have a competitive advantage over EU businesses.
Yeah.
So you don't want that. That's why they came up with this thing called level playing field. The level playing field basically means we shouldn't have rules and laws that are too different from the EU, such as to give us an unfair advantage. Now, Boris Johnson wants the free access to the European market, but doesn't want the level playing field, even though he agreed to that in his oven-ready deal that he won his election on. So now we're in a situation where the two sides can't agree on anything, and today, Boris Johnson is going to have to go meet the head of the EU to basically say, all right, we're going to need to change our negotiating positions if we're going to get a deal. Otherwise, it's no deal at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I guess that was good. The European Union was actually it was my topic of choice when I did my A-levels. So I got super interested in just the whole history of the thing, and so having to sum up anything, regarding the EU is a feat because there's just so much stuff to go through, right? And you'll know that better than anyone. But what's quite interesting is, so you pose there that if none of this works, what's going to happen is we get a no deal, and the idea that we get a no deal means what exactly?
Okay, in concrete examples, let's put it this way: if you take an example like Sunderland, there's a Nissan factory that sells 70% of all the cars that it makes to EU countries. So only 30% of them stay here. Now, if we have a no-deal Brexit, that means that 70% of those cars, of all the cars made there, will then face a tariff when they cross from the UK over to the EU. That means an extra charge, which makes it harder to sell them because it makes it more expensive to sell them. They'll also not be in the same rule system, which means that they'll need to be checked at the border, which is another cost. Which means that if you're the owner of Nissan and you're looking at, all right, if my factory is based in the UK, in Sunderland, in the Northeast, then 70% of its cars are going to face an extra cost. Whereas if the factory was based in France, Germany, on the European continental side, then only 30% of the cars will face a cost coming this way. So it stops making sense for that factory to be based here. Now, what does that mean? That factory employs 7,000 people in Sunderland and 34,000 people across the Northeast in the supply chain. Now, if it stops making sense for that factory to be here, that's very, very bad for 34,000 people. And Nissan have themselves said that under a no-deal Brexit, their business would be unsustainable. Now, that's just one business in one industry of many industries that are making the same sounds.
Yeah,
that's just one example.
Yeah, so the jobs, the losing jobs example, has been well covered, I think, in the media. Of course, the rebuttal to that is, well, yes, there's in the interim period, i.e., the first 2 or 3 years, if you like, yes, there'll be some immediate losses, job losses, so on and so forth. But all the money we'll save from, say, the membership fee, once we get a good trade deal. If we don't, all the money we'll save in membership. Look at me trying to channel my inner Nigel Farage.
Basically, all the money that we'll save in membership will basically go towards offsetting any economic damage.
Exactly. Or at least will in some way cushion some of those issues. They might say to you, why don't you believe in Britain?
So that's the thing. And on that why don't you believe in Britain thing, the analogy that I often use is if I've got a mate who says he believes that he can fly, if he then heads towards a cliff, it is my duty as a friend to stop him. Because even though I believe in my friend, I also believe in my friend's limitations. And believing that the UK can be fine in a no-deal scenario, you're not being a good friend of the UK.
So you think no deal is akin to jumping off a cliff?
Well, as I mentioned, if we do half of our trade with the EU, if even Michael Gove, who's minister for No Deal, who has himself said that food will be more expensive because food production will be more expensive in the case of a no deal. Now, given that earlier this year we saw supermarket shelves empty because of COVID, which didn't even damage our food supply, it just made people worried about our food supply. Whereas no deal Brexit would actually damage our food supply, and a third of our food comes from the EU. That is not what we needed during a pandemic. Now, on the issue of the membership fee, you may remember in 2016, the Brexit campaign went around with a bus that said £350 million a week goes to the EU. Let's spend it on the NHS instead. And that figure was actually a lie. It was a gross figure. It's about 10 billion, which is about 190 million a week.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the fact that even if you just take the extra paperwork that it costs if we're outside of the EU, period. Forget tariffs, forget difference in regular costs. Just the fact of our stuff will have to use paperwork to cross the border. That's £7 billion a week that will cost UK businesses extra. That's 7 billion, and so you've only got 3 billion left, and then you have to start talking about tariffs, differences in regulation. The fact that analogy that I often use for the EU is it will always be cheaper to take a bus than it will be to take a taxi. We share the cost of a lot of things, because we're in the EU, because we're sharing that cost among 20. We were sharing those costs among 28 countries. For example, there's a GPS program called the Galileo project, which basically is this GPS program that was supposed to be across the EU, make GPS better across the EU. Now, that cost £8 billion to set up, and that cost was shared among 28 countries. The plan for the UK after Brexit was to do it by ourselves at a cost of 5 billion. So if you do some basic maths, if you share 8 billion between 27 countries, or 28 countries, or 5 billion shared between one country, Brexit is not saving us money. Yes, there's money that we give to the EU, but we save a lot of money by doing so.
That makes perfect sense. And the analogies work, I guess. The analogies are forceful in that they help us kind of imagine, as you're saying, the one about jumping off a cliff, about cost savings. I guess there's some people who may be looking at this debate, and like I said, they were happy to engage with the kind of more the larger topics of, say, sovereignty and immigration and things like that. And let's be honest, there are some parts of the debate that are kind of ridiculous. So for instance, just to talk about immigration for a little, just a few seconds or so, we've heard the idea that there's this influx of Bulgarians in the country. I think most people know that is just kind of it is what's the term? The term's left in my mind. Yeah, it's xenophobia clothed in numbers and stuff like that. So that aside, there are some leavers who aren't all just and I'm talking about hard leavers there, the folks who believe in hard Brexit, who aren't just closet racist or closet xenophobes, who go, okay, so we've got all these prescriptions made about. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Superb. All these prescriptions made about we'll be poorer off, we'll be worse off, things won't be as good, and they listen to these prescriptions by or these forecasts rather by experts, and they go, yeah, but sovereignty is so important to us that even if we were to have a recession or to struggle getting a trade deal, that will be our struggle, and it's our struggle to have. And I guess they just don't want to get lost in the weeds of all the kind of 8 billion versus 5 billion, because most ordinary people may look at that and they don't even understand it for the most part. They just want to they want British laws to be made by British politicians, quote unquote. Whether that's right or wrong is neither here nor there. But where we are right now, we just heard come out a few days ago that. Well, not even days ago, literally 19 hours ago, that chances of a deal are receding, which means this 31st of December deadline that we've got, it may be the case that we don't get a deal at all. So, I mean, are you prepared for that? How are your efforts going to maybe frustrate the process or even have people thinking otherwise?
So on the issue of yes, it'll cost us economically, but sovereignty is worth it. That is an argument that I fundamentally just oppose and have pretty much zero respect for. The reason why I have zero respect for it is because if you look at the demographics of people who actually voted Brexit, if you look at the age group of the 18 to 24, they voted 73% Remain. If you look at the entire age group of the under 65 population of the UK, that is a Remain voting population as a whole, which means that the population that will actually have to work in the economy that Brexit creates voted Remain on the whole. So if you start talking about, yes, it will hurt us economically, but sovereignty is worth it, you're basically saying, I'm old enough that this won't affect me, but I want you to pay for values you don't even hold and pay a higher price for them in an economy that I won't have to work in. That is fundamentally a disgusting attitude, because people of this country will suffer a lot because of this. And the people least affected will be those who wanted it. The people most affected will be those who desperately tried to avoid it.
Yeah, but that argument runs both ways, because the idea also is, well, older people have contributed far more to the country's coffers for years, and so should have the right to make that decision on the sovereignty of the country. I mean, the membership bill we've been paying, it's older people who've contributed the most to that. All the different what folks may say are laws that have been overruled by the EU, whether it's bankers' bonuses, whatever it is. Old people would say, well, listen, that's our lifetime that these things have happened in. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because I do think you can read that argument both ways. You can say young people have much more of the future to live, and as such, their opinions should weigh more. But equally, you can make the case otherwise.
I haven't heard that argument before, but I do have a quick rebuttal to it. The idea that essentially older people paid for the right to change our future by contributing so long to it. Nothing gives you the right to buy someone else's future. If you are not affected by the future Brexit creates, you have no right to force that on people, no matter how much you've paid. That is a simple right of basic humanity. You cannot buy somebody else's freedom. And we are talking freedom here because as members of the EU, as citizens of the EU, we have the right to live, work, and love in 31 countries across Europe, because that's because of freedom of movement. We lose that right on December 31st. So we are talking about the idea of just taking away the freedoms from our fellow citizens, and no amount of payment gives anyone that right. Yeah. As for how I'm trying to frustrate a no deal Brexit, there's nothing that can be done now. It's in the hands of the negotiators, and I'm essentially waiting to find out which of the two paths we're going to take. Boris Johnson will either get a deal that means we have free trade access to the EU, but without being in the EU rule system, which means we'll see a steady decline of the UK economy over the next 10 years until people finally realize, oh, wait, hang on.
Femi, folks would say you're being pessimistic. Are you really saying over the next 10 years, we'll see a steady decline of the UK economy, and that's that? The UK, I mean, this is what people might say, and perhaps this is where some of the kind of backlash, for another better term, may come from, is that, okay, suppose you are right, and the immediate shock cost will be quite sizable. Fair, but are you then saying? I mean, I studied economics. That the idea that we could make forecasts that are 10 years long that we believe in, it's wishful thinking, really. There's just so many moving parts, so many things that we haven't even worked out yet to say that the UK's economy will steadily decline for the next decade.
So you studied economics. I didn't. However, I would ask you, what's one of the golden rules of international economics, of international trade? What's like the bog standard rule that exists?
The golden rule. I mean, it's hard to ask that. Depends
name one.
You're talking to. Some folks may be interested in making partners in international trade. Some folks may be interested in comparative advantage. I mean, it really depends. But it's easier if you tell me.
Okay, so there is the gravity rule, which basically means trade halves as distance doubles. Pretty much every country in the world has trade deals with the countries that are physically closest to them. That's true with the case of America having close trade ties with Canada and Mexico, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the African Union, which is starting to grow, and the European Union, of course. Now, that's because all countries do a disproportionate amount of their trade with countries that are nearby. That will always be the case with any country, regardless of how digital the world gets.
Yeah.
Now, that means that it will always be, that means that Europe will always be our primary market. Now, if we are outside of the EU system of rules, if for any business in an EU country, anything that they make can be sold in any other EU country without any tariffs, charges, regulatory checks, or anything like that, we will be permanently at a competitive disadvantage against all the other businesses in our primary market for good. That's an unavoidable fact of Brexit. So it is a negative for the country moving forward, period.
But the idea that we could not attempt to make things I mean, even in terms of what you believe in and what you're advocating for. So are you now basically sitting on your hands? The country's going to steadily decline. I mean, and so we just have to watch the decline. I mean, is that your position?
No, my position is we need to turn this around as fast as possible.
Turn what around? The vote, or we need to stay in the European Union?
Given that, as I just mentioned, there is no good outcome to Brexit. It is a permanent negative, a permanent ball and chain around our economy. We have to have in mind that the ultimate goal is to rejoin and reestablish trade links with our continent. That has to be the goal. But how do we get there? Well, for starters, we're going to see the damage start to really get shown to people next year. It's going to be sharp in January, but that'll die down a bit when they start to sort out the ports and stuff. But we'll see that decline really start next year. But the main issue is you've heard of turning around the vote. There's been this idea that Brexit is this will of the people, that it's democratic. It's not. It's straight up not.
Why was a referendum not democratic?
So if you look at what the two options were, you have remain in the EU, which, as I mentioned before, is being signed up to the treaties of the EU. It's a very specific relationship. There's 724 pages to that treaty. There's decades of legislation associated with it. It establishes our trading relationships, the rights of citizens, how we cooperate, all that sort of stuff. What was the leave option? What does that mean? That could be literally any other relationship. As a result, in that 52%, that majority, you have people that wanted completely incompatible things.
Well, Femi, to be honest, the same thing could be said of Remain. Where Remain could have meant remain in reform. Remain could have meant leave things exactly as they are and carry on, kind of, letting the invisible hand guide us to where we need to be. Remain could have been, as we've often done, let's continue to negotiate opt-out clauses of specific treaties. Remain could have also meant different things. And here's the problem with referendums is if you have a referendum, you cannot get the perfect text for both sides. And hence why the AV... Oh gosh, that's my laptop reminding us of the time. Hence why the alternative vote and referendum equally face similar issues. Folks were like, well, we didn't really flesh out what either side means. Ultimately, this is what's going to happen when you've got a binary choice in a referendum. You can't get the perfect text right. You are correct about leave not being very clear about what leave is. Everyone concedes that. But I think one of the failures of the Remain campaign as well is that it never really fleshed out what Remain was. So, some Remainers were campaigning for, listen, it's too complicated to leave. Let's just stay. Whereas some were saying, no, let's stay and let's reform the EU because it is becoming undemocratic. And, the fact that only one body can initiate legislation, like all these different things were problems for some people, but they never got a voice, if I'm honest.
But there is a fundamental difference, however, between between saying, all right, there's some variations between let's stay in the house and let's stay in the house and maybe change some bricks. Let's stay in the house and maybe add an extension. Or let's burn down the house and move anywhere else. No idea where, completely undefined. The margin of difference of the various options, the margin of variation, the margin of deviation, whichever term you want to use, of the different options, the difference between no deal and Norway and a single market deal where you basically stay in the single market, stay in the customs union, follow the rules of the EU, follow the trade rules, versus no deal at all. That difference is far larger than any of the differences on the Remain side. Not to mention, all the Remain, literally, from a legal standpoint, you can satisfy what the Remainers voted for on day one because that treaty is very, very specific. And it's a building block for it if you want to decide later to change things. However, there was no detail whatsoever on the leave side, which is why you ended up with, at that election, where Boris Johnson had supposedly negotiated his amazing World People deal, you had, out of the three parties that supported Brexit, the DUP, the Brexit Party, and the Conservatives, 2 out of the 3, Brexit Party and the DUP, opposed Boris Johnson's deal. The Brexit Party, Nigel Farage, even said that in a referendum between Boris Johnson's deal and Remain wins that referendum and wins it every single time. He said that before the election. And after the election, Boris Johnson has spent this year undermining his own deal, calling it unfair, literally saying he will break international law to undermine his own deal. So the idea that this deal represents the will of 52% is an absolute mathematical absurdity.
Yeah, I take your point, and I think you're right there. You know, I don't think I could argue that at all. I think anyone with common sense would see that the referendum in and of itself was problematic. But I could not, in good conscience, say it was because of imperfect information, because that always will be the case of the side that did not win the referendum. The same thing happened with the Scottish vote, where after a decisive win, I think Scots are still saying that it was because of imperfect information that they lost that referendum. Hence why now, and has been, just even though it was meant to be a once in a generation vote, we're still talking today about Scottish referendum. Scottish independence. And again, they make the claim about imperfect information, even though it was their campaign to win. I mean, we had Alex Salmond everywhere talking about the benefits, of independence. But what he said was actually the reason why they lost was because they couldn't articulate what currency Scotland would use, thereby saying, oh, if we had that information, then that's just not true. Ultimately, you have to, when you're putting a referendum out, you do your best to put on the ballot card, for want of a better term, the best 2 options you can think of. Then people vote, and then you have to accept the will. You kind of have to do that. Otherwise, so this idea of turning the vote, I think some people will be listening to this going, huh? You want us to have another referendum? So hold on. How would you do it? Would you have another referendum, or would you just flip the vote? I mean, what exactly would you do?
So as for having a referendum, you would have to at this point the referendum would have to come once you've negotiated the deal, we found out what the new deal would be, and then put that deal to the people in a referendum between that deal and rejoining the EU. That's what you'd have to do now. On the issue of referendums in general, let's take Scotland first of all, because there are several referendums we've mentioned. The issue with Scotland, in my view, isn't about not having perfect information. It's the fact that Scotland was fundamentally betrayed. In 2014, you have the Tories going to Scotland saying, you need to vote to stay in the UK, because otherwise, if you leave the UK, you'll be out of the EU. And then 2 years later, we've dragged them out of the EU, even though Scotland voted heavily to remain. So that's the fundamental reason why I do believe that a second Scottish referendum on independence is justified, because the thing that they voted for has fundamentally changed. Just like with Brexit, the thing that we voted for was 4 words in 2016. Leave the European Union. Right now, it's a 650-page treaty, which many of those who voted for Brexit do not like. Put yourself in the position of the DUP. Their entire thing is that the idea that they believe there should be no border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's their entire reason for being. And yet the Brexit that they voted for creates a border between Northern Ireland and
that one is ironic.
Yeah. So the idea that it's their will, even though they contributed at least, I think the mass is about 600,000 votes to the leave vote, is ridiculous. And then on the issue of, and let's look at how referendums could and should be done, because if you're going to have this referendum in 2016, the way it could have been done democratically is to put a very specific leave option on the table, at least a framework of what that treaty would look like. Is it going to be shared laws? Is it going to be zero tariff? Is it going to be no deal? Some detail. Now, here's the thing. If I were to describe a decent referendum to you, it would be the referendum that they had in the Good Friday Agreement, whereby they negotiated the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, the peace process.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And then they sent the Good Friday Agreement, the text of it, to every single voter in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and then they had the referendum. So they saw the deal first. The analogy that I used for the referendum in 2016 is, imagine if you signed a contract with somebody which was completely blank, and then they wrote the terms of that contract 3 years later and then told you that was your will. That is what happened with Brexit. In fact, right now, it's about 4 years later. That's when we had the referendum in 2016. We're now entering 2021, and we still don't know what exactly was the terms of that deal were. That's why it was undemocratic. It's not a reflection of the will of the people. The other referendum you mentioned was on changing our electoral system, and that is the critical thing, because I'm not surprised. I mean, I voted to change the system, but it was what was called at the time a dirty little compromise. What we need in this country is not AV. We need PR, proportional representation. One of the reasons why we're in such a massive mess right now is because at the only opportunity we've had to actually see the terms of that Brexit deal, which was the 2019 general election, 52.7% voted for parties that were committed to a second referendum, which means logically, objectively, if everyone's vote in this country had counted equally in that election, we would still be in the EU. That is simply a matter of fact, because you would have 52% of MPs in Parliament being for parties that were committed to a second referendum. That's why it is so critical that we get proportional representation, because in both the 2017 election and the 2019 election, progressive parties such as the Greens, Lib Dems, Labour, SNP, parties significantly more progressive than the Tories anyway, have got a majority of the votes, and yet the Tories have remained in power because we do not have an actual functioning democracy in this country.
Well, that's one way to put it. I mean, there's so much I could say about the voting system, and I voted for first past the post in that referendum, and maybe there's another podcast about voting systems to go into, because I do think it's about weighing up the pros and cons. You've fleshed out a key pro of having whether it's AV or closed list, whatever it is. But there are some considerable cons, I think, about stability but also about fringe parties and things of that nature. But away from that, and kind of just getting rid of populism and things like that, but which I think is a bane on society, by the way. But we won't go there. There are some things that will change on the 1st of January, because folks may be going, well, what's the point of this debate? What's the point of going back and forth on the numbers on 8.5 billion or 6 billion? Well, it's important for people to know that from the 1st of January, if you're planning on retiring in the UK, that you won't automatically be allowed to do that. There are things that will have to change now. We're talking about a UK points-based system for immigration that will start to apply to EU citizens. Travel rules are changing. The UK will no longer be making those annual payments towards the EU's budget. Arrivals from the UK. This is probably the biggest one that people will notice. But arrivals from the UK will stand in a different queue at passport control. But these are all the changes that we'll feel immediately. But on this topic of the UK's decline in economy over the next 10 years. I mean, what and to kind of wrap this up, if you like, what are your what's your forecast? I know you've said that steady decline, but I'm just thinking, what's your hope for the UK? Because I think this is what it comes down to. Now, you may say people are being wishful, or they're just being, kind of small-minded or whatever. But there are some young people who may be going, yeah, I voted Leave. Yeah, I've heard all the arguments back and forth. There were lots of forecasts made about what would happen when we voted Leave, about the economy would shrink, and that didn't happen. And so they have positive views about what will happen over a 10-year period. I wonder for you, who ardent Remainer, self-confessed do-gooder, what's your forecast? What's your hope for the UK?
My hope for the UK is that essentially, because, as I mentioned, we have that majority of the country voting for progressive parties, yet that progressive vote is split among several parties on the left, giving the Tories an advantage in the elections. I need Labour, the Lib Dems, not necessarily the SNP, because they're going to win in Scotland regardless. Labour, the Lib Dems, Plaid, the Greens, to have an electoral pact based on Labour committing to electoral reform within 12 months of taking office. The reason that will work is because it means that Greens and Lib Dems can vote for Labour at this next coming election as a way of making their votes actually count at the following election, which they currently don't. And so if you get that, you then have a majority for the anti-Tory parties, anti-Tory MPs in Parliament, and then we can start to make some changes, bring about electoral reform, get us back into the EU, fix actually fulfill the promises that were made to Scotland in 2014 so that they don't want to leave anymore. And then you can get the country back on track, back in the EU, and back being, and make it a tolerant country. Do all the things that Boris Johnson will never do, even though he claims to be that he's responded to Black Lives Matter, even though he hired an equalities minister who just said that it's illegal to teach about white privilege.
that was a really, I mean, on that though. Sorry, I shouldn't be doing this, but it's because I do find that an interesting point. And I know like we're getting like to closing time, so let me know if you have a hard stop, by the way.
Oh.
But I find the equalities things quite interesting. By the way, your hope is brilliant, and I think I share the same hope as you. I do think we need reform, especially we need electoral reform. I'm not sure if I agree with different pacts, and I'm not sure about Labour's capacity to be a broad church.
I'm working on it.
let's just put that out there. But on this topic of the equality, because I found it really interesting that so white privilege for some people doesn't exist, quote unquote, right? And for some it's so obvious that it's, you know, it beggars belief that we're even debating it.
Yeah.
But as a concept, it cannot be taught. I mean, surely you can see that it cannot be taught as fact in schools where there's no kind of critical. I mean, how would it be taught? Would it be taught that white people have privilege, black people don't? End of. Or do you teach it with the opposite side, opposite perspective? I'm just wondering, with contested theories, quote unquote, how do we teach them in schools?
So I think that in any civics or PSHE lesson, it is appropriate to discuss the fact that we do live in a society where there is racism. And you don't have to say, it wouldn't be white privilege exists, end of, move on. It will be, all right, what percentage, how many black people are stopped and searched by police compared to white people? Oh, it's 10 times as many. Has been any research done into how the sound of your name can affect your likelihood of getting an offer from a job application? Oh, Oxford University sent out 3,200 CVs changing nothing but the name, completely identical, and they found that people with Nigerian-sounding names had to send 80% more job applications to get a job offer. Okay, so that means that there's clearly an unfairness within society in terms of improving your life by getting a job. Okay, so that does mean that if you do have an English-sounding name, there are certain privileges that come along with that. Does that necessarily mean that if you are white, you're automatically going to be privileged in the sense of having a comfortable life, not being working class? No, it does not. It simply means that if you are white, your race is not a reason that's holding you back in life.
Oh, but so and ergo my point. So because I remember volunteering in a school once, and I was just imagining that classroom I was in. Oddly enough, it was a social studies type of PS. So I thought to myself, how would you teach this here? Would you just say everything you've just said verbatim, which then would lead probably me to say, so what do you want the black kids and the white kids, and notice we're talking about kids here, what do you want them to take away from that class? Do you want the white boy to take away, I need to relinquish my white privilege, or I need to help more black people out? Like how would it work as a lesson is my point, because that's what I took from what she was saying. Yes, it was odd. It was ironic that she was black and she's a Tory. I get that kind of political part of it. When I thought about it practically, I kind of thought, well, how would this work in classrooms? And these are issues we're still debating about, how white privilege, quote unquote, materializes in the world, and how we see it. Is it a structural force? Is it a pathology of, these are things that I think are still being debated. Not to say they don't exist, of course they do, but they're being debated. So her saying that right now it shouldn't be, I just thought that was a non-issue, but the kind of the furor it got online, I was a bit confused with.
So in terms of how does it work? What do you want the black kids to do, the white kids to do? I mean, to a certain extent, you do have to just rely on some innate goodness in people. I mean, we don't expect, when we teach people about certain religions, we teach people about Christianity, about Islam, about Judaism, about Sikhism in religious studies class, or at least if that still exists anymore. It's been a while since I've been in school. When we teach them about that, we're not saying go away and here's what you need to do in respect to those religions. You're teaching them the facts about the society they live in. There are people who have a different experience to the majority in your country. Here's their experience. Do with it what you will. I hope that you will take this information and be more considerate in your life. But the very fact of being informed about that is in and of itself an inherent good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is it. Is there enough good in people
Mm.
to do it? Because I remember being young and being in school, and everything was a joke first and
Mm.
foremost, first and
Yeah,
foremost.
yeah.
But also some lessons gave me ammo to say all sorts of different things, and I just wonder with something as nuanced as how privilege presents itself in the world, and how to really read discrepancies and numbers, and to ensure that black kids, because this is something I'm super passionate about, don't walk around with an inferiority complex. And that I have seen that happen. Like I have a younger brother, I have younger siblings who sometimes say things like, "Oh, where did you get that from?" And they've been fed this narrative that they are X, Y, and Z, and I've got to kind of almost do the work to be like, "No, you're not that." That's my fear. And then who's the teacher teaching this? Is it a teacher who does? Is it a white teacher? Is it a black teacher? No, how? This is where I get it's on how it's implemented that I get all kind of nervous. But maybe that's just the implementation thing, and nothing more.
I think I would always maintain that the message is more important than the messenger. And if we are to go, if we are going to teach kids, because I mean, we right now the biggest weapon that essentially racists in the media use is the narrative that racism doesn't exist. Because if you can tell people that racism doesn't exist, you don't have to address racism, and racism will continue. It's the principle about what is equality. If Jack has 5 sweets and Jill has 2 sweets, if you give both of them 3 sweets, Jack will still have more. So racism has to be actively combated. Now, if people are vulnerable and susceptible to the idea that racism doesn't exist, that there's no racial injustice in the country, which is what you have many figures trying to convey, then racism isn't going anywhere. So something needs to be done to make sure people know the facts that they need to know to counter those narratives, so that we are a better society moving forward. Now,
Absolutely.
if we are teaching kids about other societies, about a more inclusive and representative history of our country, if we're teaching kids that, for example, I know that me personally, if I think back to what I learned in history class, we're talking First World War, Second World War, King Henry VIII, a history of medicines, Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's really about it. Pretty much every story I learned in history was stories where we were the good guys, we defeated the bad guys, or here's some achievement that we, the white British, made over the rest of the world. That's my history knowledge. No black history, no history of empire. And I think that if people, and we have a country that readily accepted the idea that 27 countries whose GDP is 5 times the size of ours, whose economy is 5 times the size of ours, need our country more than our country needs those 27 countries. Therefore, they have to believe, if they believe that Brits are inherently better than everyone else, arguably by a factor of 27. That kind of British exceptionalism, that kind of nationalism, can only come if you believe that we're better than that. And if we were taught in schools that our economic superiority, the economic superiority of the West, came about in part due to the rape, enslavement, colonization, murder, and robbery of those countries that we now seem to think of as inferior, we'd stop seeing them as inferior.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been watching The Crown recently, and it's quite a segue, but it's have you seen The Crown?
No, not yet. I just know that the royals are quite angry about it.
Yeah, they are, and it doesn't paint them in a very good light. In an odd way, and I guess this is the power of cinema. It really made me feel sorry sorry for them, because the system, it really, it's the system. Sorry, I'm getting all into my Marxist bag. It's the system, but but I'm gonna wrap up it. Femi, I appreciate. I'm trying to be honorable, good with time, with your time, but we've definitely got to have you back at some stage,
Absolutely.
because I think there's so much more to discuss. But thank you for helping us out with Brexit. I think this is going to be very helpful for people who, you're kind of ashamed to say you don't know what's going on, but I think this podcast will help people.
But yeah, stuff wasn't explained to people, and it's still not being explained, and that's the problem.
Yeah, but I appreciate your time. I was going to say folks should follow you on Twitter, but I think everyone knows everyone knows your Twitter. But
well, I'm Femi on Twitter, so there you go.
Yeah, follow Femi. But Femi, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot for having me.
I'm looking forward to speaking again. Thank you so much.
You too. Merry Christmas.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.
That was very, very fun. I loved that. I actually really did enjoy that. Femi's just a legend, like I said, on the call. But I hope you guys know, I hope you listen. There's so much happening with Brexit, and you should be updated with what's going on. It's not too heavy or too tough or too hard. It just depends where you go to for the information. And at this stage, I should plug Common Sense. We are a news network for and by millennials. We create spaces for people who disagree to learn from each other. And if you want to find out more about Brexit, especially as we approach this deadline, then go to join.tcsnetwork.co.uk. But apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Do subscribe if you haven't. It's LTCS Podcast on Twitter and on Instagram. And I'm hoping to start some debates this week as well. So let me know what you think about this podcast with the hashtag LTCS. It's been great. You're going to have a great week. Yes, you are. Sorry, this podcast has become a kind of quasi-motivational thing. Folks, forgive me. Have a great week. And until next week, take care.